On the morning of May 19th, 1536, a queen exited her apartments at the Tower of London and stepped onto scaffolding. In a few moments, this queen would meet her demise. False charges were trumped up against her in order for her husband to take a new wife. It is said that Anne Boleyn had never looked that beautiful on the day of her unaliving. And her last words to the public was, "God save the king." People often wonder why Anne Boleyn praised the king before she left this world. But if you're a mother or an aunt, you understand why she did that. She had to protect her daughter, Elizabeth I. Now we know that karma is a funny thing, and it just so happens that out of all of Henry VIII's children, his daughter from Anne Boleyn would go on to be one of the most successful monarchs the world has ever known, creating the Elizabethan era. However, at the time of Anne's undoing, it was not considered possible for a woman to be so great. After Anne was unalived, she was placed under the ground of a church floor. And almost 500 years later, on the day of her unaliving, a bouquet of red roses has been sent to this particular place on the floor of a church, honoring the life that was lost. Now, for a long time, it has been a mystery as to who was sending these red roses. However, many people think that they've figured it out. And that, my friends, is what we are going to talk about today on Esoteric Atlanta. If you're not a history fan, I would tempt you to stick around because history ain't nothing but gossip. And the most important part of history is that we are supposed to learn from it so that we do not repeat the same mistakes. And in my humble opinion, as a non-historian, I do believe that Anne Boleyn is one of the most important people to shape the Western world today. But before we go any further, you know what to do. Please hit that subscribe button and give us a like. And before we get into the episode today, just a big thank you to all of our patrons and our producers here on Esoteric Atlanta. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible. If you would like to help support the work we do here on Esoteric Atlanta, there is a link to our Patreon account down in the description box below. All right, you guys, welcome to Esoteric Atlanta. Of course, my name is Brice. I am so excited about this episode today. I love history. If you've been on this channel for a while, you know I freaking love history. It was one of my favorite subjects in school, history and literature. And I feel like literature and history go hand in hand. Like, I really feel like American literature should be studied alongside American history. And I really feel like English literature should be studied alongside English history because these are people who lived. These are peoples whose lives mattered just like our lives matter. And even though hindsight is 2020, even though we can look back on history and we can judge them for their actions, we have to always remember that in the heat of the moment when these people were making decisions that shaped the world around them, they were doing so without knowing what the aftermath of those decisions would be. And so that's why I find it so freaking fascinating. We know that history is also, for those who have been around my channel for a while, you know I say all the time that history ain't nothing but gossip. That's all it really is. And because it's been so long since these people lived, we can take a more subjective, if not at times objective view of these people's lives. Now, there is a very famous quote that says, "History is like a foreign country. They do things differently there." And we are going to speculate on that a little bit today because I don't think, even though it's hard for us not to judge people that lived 500 years ago based on our standards today, we really can't do that because the world was so different for them and things were customary for them that are not for us. And so it's a hard one to ponder, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to ponder on some things today, and we're going to eventually get to these roses that have been left at the burial site of Anne Boleyn mysteriously for all these years. Now, as I said in the opening, they do think they know who is sending these roses, and we're going to talk about that. It's actually not that exciting. It makes sense when you find out who it is that's potentially sending these roses. I'm kind of sad we now know who's doing it because I think it was way better to not know. Made it way more romantic and obviously mysterious. I mean, it's a mystery when we didn't know who was doing it, but it makes sense who they think is actually doing it now. So we're going to get that to that at the end. And we're going to talk about Anne Boleyn a little bit, and we're going to talk about why I feel like, as a non-historian, as a layperson, as just someone who loves to study history, why I think she is one of the most important people to ever walk the earth as far as like how our society is set up today. Now, again, before I get into it, things are nuanced, right? Like I don't think she is important because she's like special or she's better than anybody else. She just was playing out her karma, and what happened has affected us even to this day. So don't get me wrong when I say that. Like, we're all equally special, but I don't think she really knew, or even at her demise, I don't think she understood the impact that her life and her choices and her daughter were going to have on the trajectory of the Western world, which we're going to get into that because again, I find that so fascinating. And we're also going to speculate about Anne's motives as a woman. Like, what were her motives? But before we get into that, we can't really talk about Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII's relationship without going back. We really need to understand the trajectory of emotions and what is happening. Like, we are all the product of a few generations before us, right? Like, we carry that trauma, we carry that forward whether we know it or not. And so we have to go back to the War of the Roses. And this is an area of history that is intense. Um, very important time in history as far as like leading up to the Tudor dynasty. It's what created the Tudor dynasty, which is probably the most studied dynasty when it comes to English royal history. They're all the same family, right? They're all coming from the same family. They're all branches off the same tree, but you have these cadet families, and the Tudor is one of them. And so we have to go back and we have to like talk a little shit here for a minute. Like, that's what I love about history. We're going to talk some shit, and we're going to talk about some of these characters that whose actions like enabled someone like an Anne Boleyn to come into Henry VIII's life. And so grab your tea, grab your adult beverage if it's the time of day where you can have an adult beverage. Sit down with me. Let's gossip about this. Let's talk about this so that we can understand the motives behind Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn better in regards to why all these years later in our modern time, red roses are left at her burial site every year on the anniversary of her execution. So, just a little bit of a disclaimer before we get into this. I am going to be talking about the War of the Roses and the Tudor dynasty off the top of my head. I have not done any research into this. Usually I do tons of research into a subject before I present it to you on a show. However, because of what's happening with YouTube right now, with AI like mimicking and then shadow banning us, I am not going to put the research effort into it. I think I know enough. I think I remember enough to be able to just talk about this off the top of my head. I'm going to be very impressed if I can literally get through this whole story without having to pause for a second and double check something. With that being said, for all my historians or all my history buffs watching right now, please understand this is not me being lazy. This is me being stubborn because of what's happening on YouTube right now. If you don't know, if you're new here, there are some cases that are happening right now. We have all these AI channels. What is happening and what has been alleged to be happening on YT is that people like me, there's a lot of people like me that do deep dives here on the YT, that we are doing all this work into these subjects. We're preparing these stories, we're researching, storyboarding, putting our episodes up. They'll be up for like a day or two, then they'll get shadow banned, and then an AI channel will basically regurgitate our research and it won't be shadow banned. And the proceeds from AdSense go back to the platform for that. So that's the alleged allegations. There are some lawsuits going on right now. So with that being said, I'm just going to talk off the cusp. And you know what? Maybe that'll be better because we're going to be gossiping and we're going to be talking some shit about these people. And so maybe it's better if I don't have it totally organized with the actual dates of everything. In fact, the only date I know for sure is Anne Boleyn's demise date, her execution date. All the other dates, I'm a little bit, I know this is like the 1400s coming into the 1500s. I don't know the specific dates though, but that's okay. With that being said, it doesn't really matter the specific dates. What matters is the gist of the story. So feel free, if you are a historian, if you are somebody who really likes this time, feel free to fact check me in the comment section. I won't be offended because I'm not going to give the AI any more energy. So, with that being said, let's talk some smack, let's get petty, and let's go way back to the War of the Roses. So basically, if you think you come from a bad, crazy family, just wait until you hear about this shit. Okay. So the War of the Roses was basically this war that was happening, this continual friction and battle between the Yorks and the Lancasters. This comes from this one singular king called King Edward III, who had a lot of kids, a lot of boys, and basically created like cadet families. Now, subsequently, I am a descendant of King Edward III. A lot of people are. My boyfriend is also a descendant of King Edward III, but he lived in like the 1300s, so we share no DNA at this point. So a lot of people are descendants of King Edward III. Again, he had lots of kids. His oldest son didn't make it, and then you know how it is with these royal families. It's definitely like high stakes nepotism where the crown passes to a son. You know, in some countries like France, for a long time, they had a law where the women could never inherit the crown. This is going to become a problem with Henry VIII, which we're going to get to. But England was pretty, as we get to the Tudor dynasty, England is one of the first countries besides Spain to become pretty lenient with women being the de facto inheritor of the Princess of Wales starts to become a thing. But before that, we've got all of these boys running around. And then from these families, we have more boys. So we have cousins, second cousins, first cousins once removed, third cousins. So ideally, the crown goes down a straight line. Father, son, father, son, father, son, father, son. But if the oldest son happens to pass away, we have the spare, and then it jumps to his line. If by chance we've run out of boys, we then look to the daughters of the king for their sons. So if the king has any grandsons, it might flip to the grandson, right? So that's really the only purpose that these princesses hold at this time is to A, produce heirs, and B, be married off in a political alliance. So we've got this big old family. This is from the Plantagenets. And really, you guys, at the end of the day, every single royal family, royal house that has sat on the throne is literally a Plantagenet, right? Their last names are just changing because it's bebopping around through the daughters to their grandsons. You know what I'm saying? Like my mom's maiden name is Brice. That's my first name, but that's my mom's maiden name. My mother had all sisters. So all of my cousins on my mom's side, we all have different last names, right? My last name is Watson. I have, Whitmire is one of my cousins. I'm not going to say, I don't want to dox anybody, but we all have different last names. So we have different houses. Like I am now of the house of Watson. My cousins are of another house, but we're cousins. We're first cousins. So genetically speaking, we are also all Brices, right? We're also all of the Brice family too. It's just that our mothers were our mothers are sisters, and there were no sons, and so we've taken our father's names because that's how society in the Western world works and has worked for a long time. So I hope that makes sense. So even though we're looking at different dynastical houses, they're literally all cousins. They're literally all coming from the Plantagenet line. Now, the Plantagenets themselves are super interesting too, because they are like soap opera. Like they are wicked. These Plantagenets are just cray cray, right? Like cray cray. And they are literally bloodshed. And so we've come down to this War of the Roses where now we've got a ton of them. And they're all these cousins that are like fighting each other and trying to take the throne from each other. Like so much for brotherly love, right? Like I could never do to my cousins what these cousins were doing to each other. If they're not marrying their cousins, they're killing them. Like this is just like days of our lives on speed. Like this is wild. So we're at this point where we've got this King Edward. All right, so we have to now talk about the women because if it wasn't for Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville, we would never have a Tudor dynasty, and we might still be in the Wars of the Roses to this day. Because men are kind of dumb. No offense to the men. I know I've got smart men watching right now, but men have a harder time, and this has been proven scientifically, right? Like I remember my mother talking about a study. Men have a really hard time multitasking. Women are genetically wired to multitask. That is probably something that I think most relationships, heterosexual relationships, struggle with. I know that's a struggle in my relationship. It was a struggle in my parents' relationship. You know, my boyfriend and my father could never like focus on multiple things at once. Like if your husband is like reading the paper or reading a book and you try talking to him and he doesn't respond, it's because he's literally doesn't hear you because men can really only focus on one thing at a time. Whereas women are genetically wired to focus on multiple things at the same time because we have to be mothers. All right? Makes sense, doesn't it? So when I call these men in this War of the Roses period kind of dumb, this is what I mean. These men have like two things on their mind. Taking the throne, excuse me, let me rephrase it. They have three things on their mind. Taking the throne, producing heirs to that throne, and banging women. That's it. So these women who are really not considered, I mean, it's interesting. History is very interesting with women's studies because even though women are humans and they're considered legal humans, they're still pawns. And so we look at women in extreme survival. And I've said this before when we covered the Borgias that if I had to go back and live in any of these time periods, which subsequently this is happening, it's kind of overlaps with the Borgias. Like this is kind of the same time period. Yeah. So subsequently, if I had to go back and live during this time period, please don't make me a royalty. Please don't make me a noble or a gentry. Just let me be a peasant. Because honestly, you guys, as a woman, the peasants were way freer than the nobility. Because these women were passed around. They were the key to alliances. They really had no rights. The only rights they had were through their husband or through their fathers. Women had power depending on who their father was first, because that political power secured them a political marriage. None of these marriages, for the most part, were romantic, which we're going to get to that with Henry VIII, because this gives us a little bit different of a perspective of what was actually happening in the courtly love and the Tudor dynasty. So we've got Elizabeth Woodville and we've got Margaret Beaufort. Let's talk about Elizabeth Woodville first, because this woman, if Margaret Beaufort was the boss lady, like the boss girl, girl boss, whatever it's called, which she was. She was a girl boss. Then Elizabeth Woodville would have been the trad wife. Now, Elizabeth Woodville had something over Margaret. Margaret was, again, she was a girl boss. She was very powerful, very wealthy, but we're going to talk about Margaret in a minute. Let's look at one thing Elizabeth Woodville had over Margaret Beaufort, and this was her looks. Elizabeth, I mean, we see paintings and pictures of these people now. They don't look that attractive to us, but you have to understand beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and there were different beauty standards for each. I'm sure 500 years from now, they're going to look back at pictures of us and think we look weird, right? But Elizabeth Woodville was like known to be this like pinup girl, just really lucked out when it came to the gene pool. Right, she really looked out. But Elizabeth Woodville was a what we would consider a commoner. Now she was of higher birth, like she wasn't a peasant. Her mother is an interesting case. Like there are rumors her mama was a witch, which I would love to cover her mama at some point. But her mother wasn't from England. She was a noble born woman from another country. So she did have a little bit of stake within her bloodline. Well, Elizabeth Woodville, she was married. Her husband dies. Uh-oh. Husband's gone. She's got a couple of boys. All right, we're going to try to continue. People are going to work right now, so Robbie's always got something to say about that. But nonetheless, Elizabeth Woodville was considered like this bombshell, beautiful woman. Her husband is no longer alive. She's got these sons, and because she is a woman, she's kind of desperate. Like, there's not a whole lot that women can do at this time, besides selling themselves. They've got to make like they got to move chess pieces in order to financially protect themselves, protect their surviving children. And so she knows that the king, Edward, the man who's on the throne right now, is going to be coming through her area. So she decides that she's going to literally stand on the side of the road and stop him and like beg him for favor, like beg him to help her out. Seems like a solid plan. If you're that good looking and you know you're good looking and that's really all the assets that you have because you're a woman in this time period, like why not try it? So that happens. She goes and she flags down the king. He's on his horse and he is just struck by her beauty. Well, Edward, like most kings, was a bit of a philanderer. He was a womanizer. That was normal back then, and he's used to getting what he wants. He's fighting back and forth for the throne. He's holding the throne right now, but literally with like girls. Like, if you're the prince or the king, like you can probably get any girl you want, even if you're fat and ugly. Like that's just kind of like power. That's power, right? Like look at all these old billionaires today who have these young hot wives. Like he's used to getting what he wants. So he sees Elizabeth. He's struck by her beauty. Immediately, his hormones are raging, and he's like, yo, girl, let's go do it in the forest. And Elizabeth Woodville pulls one of the most genius moves that a woman could have pulled at this time. And it actually becomes the same move that Anne Boleyn will pull many generations, many decades later with Elizabeth Woodville's grandson, King Henry VIII. Elizabeth Woodville goes in a very dramatic flair. She's like, oh, no, I would rather die than spread my legs for you as not your non-wife, basically. She's like, I'm no slut. I would rather die with dignity here on the road at your feet than be just a piece of meat. Genius. Remember that, ladies, especially my 20-something-year-old girls. Remember that. Don't open yourself up too quickly, ladies. Even though back then women were not considered like humans, really, they were kind of subhuman, they still controlled things by their body. You control that. So don't give it away too quickly. And this was genius because Edward, being a horny young guy, is like, okay, let's go get married. And that's what happens. She went to go meet Edward on the road for help, and boy, did she get help. So now this like commoner is now the queen. She is now subsequently another Queen Elizabeth. We got a lot of Queen Elizabeths coming, all actually named after Elizabeth Woodville. And so she's now the queen. And another thing about Elizabeth Woodville is that she's like a fertile myrtle. Like Elizabeth Woodville was a Michelle Duggar of 19 Kids and Counting before there was a Michelle Duggar. The fertility abilities of this woman is so impressive, especially back in the 1400s. Like her ability to pop out babies, I mean, talk about healthy stock. So she is giving Edward all of these kids. Meanwhile, they're still struggling to hold the throne. Okay. And not only is Edward struggling to hold the throne with like his cousins, he's also struggling with his brothers. He's got two brothers. Now, get this. So you think your brother is going to be loyal to you? Not in this time period, okay? Because we also have this guy named Neville. I believe that's his name. Again, fact check me in the comment section below for the historians. I'm not going to check it. I believe his last name was Neville, though. He was considered the kingmaker. And when Edward went off and like married Elizabeth Woodville just in secret in the woods, like so he could boink her, basically, and boink her he did because they had a lot of children. Um, he didn't tell this Neville guy because even though the king is the king, he is the monarch. At this point in English history, we also have all these other like privy chambers and governmental officials that are also helping the kings run the country. So we're looking at more of a balance of power. This all started with like the Magna Carta and it's kind of changed and evolved over time throughout English history. So we've got Neville. Neville is the kingmaker, and he's also kind of responsible for getting Edward a wife. So usually kings again take a political alliance. So Edward's supposed to marry like somebody that's going to be advantageous to secure him on the throne, potentially someone that's going to give him support from the military of another European power. But whoopsie, whoopsie. Edward, it seems, at this point was thinking about his other head, not this head, but that head, the one down there. And he married this commoner. But they're married now. She's the queen. She's the de facto queen. In doing that, he's now pissed off Neville. So Neville starts to scheme behind his back to get his daughter married to one of his brothers, try to put his brother on the throne. So thus, the soap opera of the War of the Roses intensifies. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, if you loved that series, this is what Game of Thrones was based off of. No, they didn't have flying dragons and that kind of stuff, but it was based off the War of the Roses, right? So think about Game of Thrones. I mean, what a brilliant title, right? It is a Game of Thrones. It is a violent but political chess game that happens between these families, and the peasantry class is just being whiplashed along for the ride. They're watching these spoiled brats, right? They're rich kids. They're a bunch of rich kids, spoiled brats, throwing temper tantrum because one cousin gets to sit on the throne and the other doesn't. Right? So God bless the peasants at this time. They're probably eye rolling the whole way, just having to live through these temper tantrum of these like rich kids, right? These privileged rich kids. But nonetheless, Edward has married Elizabeth Woodville. She's popping out a bunch of babies. Neville's pissed. He's conspiring with Edward's brothers. Okay, so all of a sudden, uh-oh, uh-oh, Edward dies. So Elizabeth's like, oh shit, because she herself is a commoner, even though she's now Dowager Queen and she's got sons that can take the throne. She basically like runs into hiding. She goes to a church basically, and because they can't, it's kind of like, remember when we were kids and we play like tag and there'd be a home base. If you get to home base, they couldn't tag you. That's kind of like what these monasteries were back then. Like this is before the Protestant. We're on the heels of the Protestant Reformation, but they're mostly monasteries. They're kind of like home base. And so Elizabeth like gathers her babies and like runs to a monastery to hide. And Richard, and this is why Shakespeare wrote a play about King Richard, he starts to circle the monastery. Like his military, Richard is Edward's brother. His other brother got, I think his name was George, got beheaded for treason by Edward. Like, there's no love lost with these brothers. So Elizabeth is hiding in the monastery with her children. Richard is circling it with his army, basically. And she's kind of stuck there. Like she can't leave because this is home base. He can't come in. She can't leave. Some of her sons have already been unalived from her previous marriage, but she's got these two boys from Edward, young little boys. They should be the oldest of the young ones should be on the throne. He should have a regent to help him rule until he comes of age, but we're in the War of the Roses, so that's not going to happen. Richard wants to take the throne, right? He wants to take the throne. And Elizabeth is in over her head. Like she doesn't know what to do at this point. And I will say, we look at history, especially with queens, and it's very clear that a lot of queens didn't quite have what appears to be motherly love for their children. I would say Elizabeth Woodville does show signs of motherly affection for her children, as does Margaret Beaufort for her one child, which we're going to get to Margaret, because this is when their paths kind of cross. So Elizabeth is like doing these deals with Richard. Like she's trying the best she can to work out a way where they can all stay alive with her brother-in-law and her brother-in-law who is her son's uncle. Like not great uncle, not like great great uncle, like literal uncle. Like Richard is Edward's brother. So think about your uncle being afraid of your uncle. Like that is wild. And so Richard kind of manipulates her and he's like, it's cool, girl. Like it's cool. It's fine. It's fine. We're family. You're my sister-in-law. Like we're family. Your kids, those are my nieces and nephews. Like, we're family. And your boys, they're really young. And my brother's not here anymore. Their dad, shame. Such a shame. He's gone. My other brother was beheaded by him, so shame. He's gone too. So literally, I'm kind of the patriarch right now. And I trust me, Bessie, Lizzie, sister-in-law, I promise you I have all the best interest for your boys. So here's what we're going to do. First, give me the oldest one. We're going to put him in the tower. And then later on, we're going to take the second one as well. I promise you, Bessie, Sissy, I'm going to take care of them. We're going to keep them in the Tower of London so that they are protected. I will rule in their place until maybe they're old enough, and then we'll transfer the power. Cool? Cool? You cool with that? And at this point, she really, I mean, what can she do? What can she do? Her other sons that have been unalived were not blood related to Richard. They were from her previous marriage. So she's already gone through that heartbreak. Meanwhile, Richard also, his wife dies, and he kind of wants to marry his niece, Elizabeth of York. Listen, royalty, they're a bunch of fucking weirdos. Like, well, like, why, marrying your cousin is bad, but marrying your uncle, that's even worse. But nonetheless, so Elizabeth Woodville, again, history is like a foreign country. They do things differently there. So Elizabeth Woodville kind of falls for it and she sends her boys to the Tower of London. Now, if you haven't been to the Tower of London, I've been to the Tower of London many, 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 many times. They had apartments in the tower. The tower wasn't just like a military hold for traders and for executions. They also had like like apartments there for the royal family. It's where women would go before they were coronated. They would stay in the apartments, like really nice living. So the boys going to the tower might sound suspicious to us today. However, it actually wasn't that big of a deal because they would have been protected and there was an apartment. So I could understand. I mean, again, hindsight's 2020. We can understand why maybe Elizabeth Woodville would have agreed to send her. Sorry, Robbie's barking again, if you can hear him. Maybe that's why she would have agreed to send her sons with her brother-in-law. So nonetheless, the boys are in the tower, Richard's ruling. And actually, if you listen to historians talk about the short time that Richard was king, he seemed to actually be a pretty decent king. He was a shitty person. I mean, he didn't do a whole lot to help his family. He definitely murdered his nephews. This is the iconic Princes in the Tower. If you're familiar with unsolved mysteries and famous historical murders, the boys end up going missing. And we don't know for sure whether somebody's outside. We don't know for sure. Now, we don't know for sure whether Richard was behind the unaliving of his nephews, but it's kind of obvious. Like some people will say that Shakespeare's play about Richard was like a propaganda piece to make people believe it was Richard and that maybe it wasn't Richard. There people have very different feelings about Richard and the Princes in the Tower. In my opinion, Occam's razor, which means the most likely scenario is probably what happened. So he probably did it. He probably did it. Like, you know, and these were young boys. Like these were not like men. These were young boys. So I'm going to pause it right there with Elizabeth Woodville because that's where we are with her. She's still like hiding in a monastery now with her daughters. And her boys are going to go missing. Richard, her tyrant brother-in-law, is on the throne. Now let's talk a little bit about Margaret Beaufort. Margaret Beaufort, Marge. Okay, you guys, Margaret Beaufort to me is one of the most fascinating. If you do ever any do like a female history course, she is literally one of the most fascinating women in our historical narrative. I mean, I don't know if I would have actually liked her. I mean, that's saying I don't know how friendly she was or if she was like someone that you would have wanted to be your mother-in-law, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But as far as her life and what she accomplished in her life in that time period is remarkable. Margaret Beaufort, she does come from nobility. She has a slither of her heirs. taking the throne. She has one son, Henry Tudor. He is her only son. She has him at like 13 years old. Never has a child after that, which I could understand that would be very traumatic. But through her line, she is connected to King Edward III. So Henry Tudor has this, her son has this slight little window of taking the throne. Now, there was some stuff that happened in like Parliament or whatever they called it back then, where they had kind of like ex-nayed legally, like said none of her descendants could ever be king, but nonetheless, when you're nobility, like the law's not going to stop you. Yeah. So there's always this kind of lingering threat, even though Henry Tudor has a very small, I mean, a fraction of the royal blood. Like he's like the last on the list to be able to legally, through royal blood, take the throne. But Margaret Beaufort herself, Henry's mother, is extremely wealthy. We're talking about like this billionaire in today's terms, and she's a woman. Now, what's interesting about Margaret Beaufort, from my perspective as a layperson, is that even though she's a woman, people listen to her. Like she's powerful enough where people like listen to her, men listen to her. I wish I could add in music here and not get a copyright strike. You know that song, She's My Best Friend. She a real bad bitch, got her own money. That song, if you Google that song, that's what plays in my head when I think about Margaret Beaufort. She's my best friend. She a real bad bitch, got her own money. You know, she is literally that bitch. She is girl bossing it before there was ever a girl boss to be a girl boss because she literally is so effing wealthy on her own right that she could probably buy England if she wanted to. So people like having her around. They want to be friends with her. They want her to be, she my best friend. She a real bad bitch, got her own money. Like they need Marge. They need old Maggie, old Margaret. They need her to be their friend. Now, Margaret Beaufort is a Lancastrian. Elizabeth Woodville is a Yorkist. So these are two opposing women. So the Queen consort is a Yorkist. Margaret Beaufort is a Lancastrian. However, Margaret has a civil relationship with the king. Margaret is very smart. So not only is she super rich, she is a genius. She can play chess. She understands that her son, Parliament has passed a law saying he can never be king. However, because of everything that's going on in the War of the Roses, all the rules are going to the wayside. She is very fearful that there will be an assassination attempt on Henry. And so she sends Henry to France, Calais, I believe. Again, for the historians down there, I'm talking off the cusp. You can correct me in the comment section if you want to. I believe it was Calais. So Henry's like living in exile this whole time. And Margaret, like Elizabeth Woodville, I do feel had an extreme protective, a mama bear protectiveness over her son that is very rare to see in this time period. She's very protective of her son. There's a great historian that I love watching over on TikTok. Viola Swamp is her name. And a while ago, I heard her talking about Margaret Beaufort. And at one point, the King Edward like wanted her to bring Henry back. Like, hey, Mark, can you bring Henry to court? And she was like, Marge was like, what? You need a tennis partner? Like, she was very suspicious of them asking about her son because she knew that if she brought him back to England, chances were he was going to be assassinated. So she kept him in Calais. So all these things are going around. She's working her magic. She's keeping political alliances. She's keeping herself alive. She's keeping her son alive. And now we have this issue. The trails cross when we get to Elizabeth Woodville, the queen, the hot babe queen, right? The pinup girl queen, who is hiding in a monastery from Richard. So it just so happens that Margaret Beaufort's doctor is the same doctor of the Queen. And I don't know if they did pap smears back then, but I can just imagine like these pap smears and Margaret's like in her pap smear going, yo, doc, can you send a message to your other patient, Elizabeth? And Elizabeth's in her pap smear and doc's like, I got a message from you from that girl boss, Margaret Beaufort. Nonetheless, the doctor delivers a message to Elizabeth Woodville. And basically, Margaret realized that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That even though Elizabeth Woodville was a Yorkist and Margaret was a Lancastrian, they needed to form an alliance because men are dumb. Men are dumb. And so, where Margaret Beaufort has power and money, Elizabeth Woodville has power in her looks. Elizabeth Woodville also has something that Margaret Beaufort desperately needs, and that's more royal blood. Margaret Beaufort, in order to secure, she starts to get this idea. It's historians debate whether Margaret ever really considered Henry would ever be a king, but at some point, she does start to consider it. Now, my personal opinion, because Margaret Beaufort was extremely religious, I personally think historians can argue with me in the comment section if they want. It's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Who knows? This was over 500 years ago. Who knows at this point? I think Margaret Beaufort also suffered from religious psychosis. And when you are that rich and when you are that politically powerful, I think you can make your religious psychosis come true. I don't think people are going to be like, girl, you crazy. Like, I think when you're that powerful, these grandiose ideas you have about God and maybe your child start to become more of a reality because you have the means to make them a reality. So Margaret realizes again, Henry is a threat to the throne, but he's a minor threat. On his own, she fears that the peasantry class, the people of England, even the nobles would probably be like, who's this guy? Like this guy is has so little royal blood left in his body that he really is not qualified to be king. So she realizes that she's going to need, if she wants to make Henry king, if she wants to end this once and for all, and ultimately win this chess game of the War of Roses, this Game of Thrones, she needs her son to marry a woman who has a shit ton of royal blood. That just happens to be Elizabeth Woodville's daughter, Elizabeth York. The same daughter that it's rumored her uncle, Richard, was also vying for to marry. All right. Granted, Henry Tudor was more her age and not so related to her. Like, I mean, they're distant cousins, not so related to her like her own uncle, her father's brother. Oh. And so she says, listen, Lizzie, you have something that I need, and I have something that you need. We can end this once and for all. I can gather support for my son, Henry Tudor, who's over in Calais. I've got all these men who are willing to fight for him, including my husband, my current husband. If you will allow your daughter to marry my son, I need your royal blood. And once that happens, we can make sure you and the rest of your children are safe. So Elizabeth agrees. So now we've got Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville in a secret alliance. These men are dumb. These women, these two women are working these men for everything. These two women, Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville, are the whole reason why the Tudor dynasty happened and why someone like Anne Boleyn walked into Henry VIII's life. It is because of this alliance. Fight me in the comment section if you want. It is because of these two women that this even happened. These powerful, powerful women who recognized that they were both powerful, even they're on two opposing sides, and they each have something the other needs. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Richard is Margaret Beaufort's enemy. He is also Elizabeth Woodville's enemy. So we can do something about this. Elizabeth Woodville agrees. Now, Henry Tudor down in France, he wins this battle between Richard. And I will say that about royalty back then. One thing that they did. I just for those who are new here, personally, I don't believe in royalty. I think it's stupid. I think it's stupid to put someone in charge of something because of who their daddy is. Like that's stupid. I think people should earn their leadership role. But nonetheless, if we're playing with monarchy, we're playing with monarchy. And one thing I'm going to say about some of these older kings, one thing that they did that I think was quite noble was that anytime there was a war, guess what? They went to war with their men. They fought with their men, and not only that, and a lot of times they had a marker showing they were the king. So they weren't even incognito, right? Even some of the women did that. Catherine of Aragon went to war with the men up in Scotland. Elizabeth I was there with the Spanish Armada. Like we're seeing leaders like literally be leaders. And so Richard met Henry Tudor. He comes up from France. He's got all the support. It is said that some of even Richard's own men turncoated on the battlefield. They had made this secret alliance with Margaret Beaufort and Margaret Woodville, and Henry VII was not the victorious one in this battle. He did claim victory. He claimed the crown, but he did it with the help of all these other men who were militaristically trained. Henry had some military training, but he had like never been to war before. Like he was never, only war he ever saw was playing with his GI Joes. So he really had the help of all these other more mature men who were smart when it came to battles, the men who turncoated on Richard. And it is said at that battle, after Richard dies, Henry takes the crown and crowns himself King of England. So now we have the start of the Tudor dynasty, which you guys, you got to know the peasantry class was probably like, oh, fucking thank God. Because at this point, not only is Richard gone, is the threat to these women's lives gone, but we have now brought the Lancastrian Henry Tudor together with the Yorkist Elizabeth, and now they are married. So these two warring factions have now come together and are married. The war is over. And that's why we see the red rose and the white rose for the Tudor dynasty. It's both the Lancastrian and the Yorkist. Now they're married. We have King Henry VII of England on the throne. And throughout all of King Henry VII's reign and some into King Henry VIII's reign, we see a lot of insecurity. King Henry VII is super insecure about being king because he knows that he himself really doesn't have the bloodline, the royal bloodline, to be king. That every ounce of royalty he claims is really coming through his wife, Elizabeth of York, who is his queen. She is the daughter of Edward. She is full on Plantagenet, a Yorkist. And so she is the only thing that is really keeping his grips on that throne once he is crowned king. So what does he do? At this point, he's got to disable any of the Plantagenets. So any of the other Plantagenets left, he's got to like assassinate him. He's got to move him around. He starts to like bankrupt. Like he wasn't really, I mean, he had a rich mama. I'll give him that. So like his trust fund was probably pretty good. But he as far as the country is concerned in the country's money, like there's issues here, right? We've just been in this huge war. Like none of the peasantry class really care about the fact that the king's got a rich mama. Right? Like they're like you've literally destroyed our country. So there's these bad money deals that Henry VII makes. But nonetheless, Margaret Beaufort really was like the mother-in-law from hell. She's as fascinating as she is. She really ruled England with Henry VII. And something that Elizabeth Beaufort did that is really kind of cool. And I hope I'm saying this right. Again, for the historians, correct me in the comment section. I'm not researching this. This is just off the top of my head. I believe she had herself declared legally femme sole. Let me know if that's right or not. Femme sole. Basically, she had herself legally declared an independent woman, even though she was married. So she was like, I'm going to be a freaking full-on human. Give me that title of femme sole so I'm not under the jurisdiction of my husband. And they're like, cool, Marg. Yeah, Maggie, we'll give you that because you're a boss bitch. Like you're a girl boss in it and you're richer than anybody in England. So we'll let you be femme sole. So she was like the first lady to like legally be an independent human, female human, not human, but female human in England. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, so Elizabeth and Henry start to have children. Now, Elizabeth York, like her mother, Elizabeth Woodville, also seems to greatly care about her children. We also see a lot of maternal instincts coming from Elizabeth York, from what we can see. Again, none of us were there. We're just looking at what we can see. And honestly, you guys, when it comes to like occultism in the royal families, I really personally don't believe that the occultism became really big until King James the First. I think that's when we see a lot of the sadistic Satanism coming into these royal families. You don't see much of that before King James the First, right? So we're looking at literally just battles of royal families at this time. And Elizabeth of York does seem to truly love her children. She has some girls. One of her daughters ends up being like the grandmother of Mary, Queen of Scots, the great grandmother of James the First. Mary, Queen of Scots, was raised really by Catherine de' Medici, whom we've covered on this channel before. I'll tag that below. And she learned all the witchcraft and stuff from Catherine, all that kind of stuff. And another one of her daughters ends up marrying the King of France. She's the Queen of France for a little bit. He dies. She comes back, marries Charles Brandon. They end up having the Grey line, which is Lady Jane Grey, which was the 9 Days Queen. That's coming in the future from where we are now in our story. So Elizabeth is popping out babies. She's got a few daughters and she's also got two sons. Arthur is the Prince of Wales. He is the de facto heir because he's the firstborn son, and Henry. Henry was not raised to be a king. Arthur was. And so now we've got to find as Henry VII starts to age and as he's building this Tudor dynasty, he's got his heir and he's got his spare. Now he needs to find a wife for Arthur. And he goes looking to Spain. At this point, Spain is like the biggest empire in Europe. This is Ferdinand and Isabella of Castile. These are the people that sent Christopher Columbus to the New World. Isabella of Castile, I love saying it that way, the way the Spanish historians say her name, she is a queen in her own right. This is like one of the first times, really, that we're seeing a co-monarchy where the queen isn't just a consort. She is a regnant as well as her husband. She is Isabella of Castile. He is Ferdinand of Aragon. And they have the strongest empire in the world. They are closely tied to the Vatican, which is important in this time period. Again, we're on the heels of the Protestant Reformation. And so Isabella has this daughter, Catherine. I think she was the youngest. Her sister, Juana, I would love to cover her one day too. Juana is fascinating. Catherine of Aragon's sister. Well, if you guys want to talk about, want to gossip about her one day, let me know in the comment section. We can totally gossip about her. So Catherine of Aragon is this daughter. And so Henry the Tudor says, you know what? If we can get Arthur betrothed to one of the daughters of Isabella and Ferdinand, that's going to make England super strong because Spain is the strongest empire. And if we have an alliance with Spain, plus we're getting some of Spain's money with the dowry, this is really going to help England's reputation. It's like being in this lunchroom, the cafeteria in high school. Spain's the cool table. We've got to figure out a way to go sit with Spain. We need to sit with Spain because Spain is going to make us cool and us powerful as a nation. And so they strike up a deal with Spain. Catherine, the youngest daughter, is now betrothed to Arthur, the first son of Henry VII, the man who is going to be king one day and keep the Tudor dynasty going. So Catherine comes to England. She brings with her all of her riches, which Henry VII is really glad to spend, and she marries Arthur. Arthur is being trained to be the king. But something happens along the way. Quite soon after they're married, oh shit, Arthur dies of the sweating sickness. Now, a lot of historians say they don't really know what the sweating sickness was. It might have been tuberculosis. We're not totally sure, but nonetheless, he dies. So now what do we do with Catherine? Henry VII is stressed at this point. He doesn't know what to do because he's got this Spanish princess who is the ticket to sitting at the cool table in Europe, but her husband is deceased. And now Henry VII, or excuse me, Henry VIII, the son, the brother, now is the de facto heir to the English throne. Henry VII is super stressed at this point. He doesn't know what to do because he has to keep Catherine. He needs to keep Catherine. Having Catherine in alliance with Spain through Catherine is like the ticket to England's success. Also, he's already spent the dowry, so he like can't give the money back. And Arthur and Catherine never had any kids. They literally had just gotten married. So what are we going to do? Now, Elizabeth York at this point had already passed away. So at one point, Henry VII actually thought about marrying Catherine himself to keep her in England, but then he decides he's going to have her marry Henry VIII. Now, there was a lot of talk around this and speculation around this because basically, Catherine claims that her and Arthur never consummated their marriage. I don't know. This is one of these big question marks in history. Who knows? Like, we really don't know if they did or they didn't. They were two teenagers. Some people are like, man, they were so hormonal. They probably did consummate it. But other people, logically speaking, Catherine and Arthur had both been raised as royalty. They were both raised to know their roles in this world. Catherine, from a young age, was raised to know she would be used as a pawn. She would be married off to another prince in order to strengthen an empire. Arthur had been raised to be the next in line in the Tudor dynasty. These children were not romantically matched. Okay? So at the ages they were, as a woman myself, especially from Catherine's perspective, which Catherine's perspective might not have even mattered as the woman, I probably wouldn't have consummated the marriage right away because I would have been afraid. I would have been scared. I don't know this guy. I don't know this kid. Like, can we get to know each other first? We're still really young. Dad's still on the throne. We got time to like get to know each other before like I let you in my bed to procreate babies. We also have rumors that Arthur might have already been a little bit sick. So maybe his gusto wasn't there like other boys his age. I don't know. There's just a lot of uncertainty around these few months that Catherine and Arthur were married. It's very common that royalty doesn't like live in the same apartments or live in the same house or have the same like, so there's just there's reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt can tell you there is a good possibility they never consummated their marriage. And this is what's really important because Catherine claims that was never consummated. She technically did not complete her marriage to Arthur. So therefore, religiously, she is now able to get what they call it, dispensation, something like that. It's what they called it, where the Pope granted her permission to now marry Henry VIII. Now, we also have a problem with Henry VIII. Henry VIII was not raised to be a king. He was raised to work in the church. So now we're getting towards the end of Henry VII's line. And we got this kid who is really just a juvenile punk who has no clue how to be a king that's now going to be a king. But good news, he's married to the most popular girl in Europe. The most popular, he still gets to sit at the popular table because now he's got Catherine of Aragon as his wife. And we're going to take this time, we're leading up to Anne Boleyn, we're getting to this point, but we're going to take this time to take a small break to hear from a word from one of our sponsors. Over on Fusion Body Studio, we have a brand new playlist of exercise videos, a playlist that I personally am so excited about. This is Bar for Men and women. Now, we already have a bar fusion playlist full of a ton of different bar classes that I have designed, but because of the men on our studio and my own experience with bar, what it's done for me and what it's done for my boyfriend, I decided to create a playlist specifically with men in mind. Now, again, this playlist can be done by women too. However, I've made this playlist a little bit more masculine in the way that I've set up the exercises and the way that I've planned out the classes. Before my boyfriend started doing bar, he used to always laugh and say it was too feminine for him or that I was just dancing around. But when he finally acquiesced and decided to do bar, he ended up losing 9 pounds in 1 week. And at 53, he has gotten his 22-year-old six-pack back. His butt is perky again, and he's walking a little taller and feeling a little bit better about himself. himself. In fact, just recently, he told me that he craves barre now over yoga, over strength training. And this is obviously something that a little secret that I've known for the past 9 years, because barre has definitely changed my body. It's made my Ashtanga practice so much stronger. It's healed my injuries, and it's made me at 42 feel sexier and feel way more in my body than I ever did in my 20s. Now, for barre too, for men, we also look at the history that athletes in this country specifically, football players, American football players, are notoriously told to go and take ballet classes. This helps with agility. It works the smaller accessory muscles, which then support the heavier, bigger muscles. So regardless of what other activity you're doing as a man, if you're doing weightlifting, if you're running, if you're rowing, if you're kickboxing or boxing, barre is going to help support that activity. Barre is so beneficial for men, even though it's often marketed towards women. Many athletes, martial artists, and physical therapists now incorporate barre movements because of how effectively it trains stabilizer muscles, mobility, and body control. Barre targets small, often overlooked muscles, especially in the hips, the glutes, and core, that are essential for athletic performance and joint stability. These muscles help prevent injuries during running, weightlifting, or other contact sports. The isometric holds and the micro movements develop endurance control, not just bulk. It's better to control squats, deadlifting, and especially overhead work. Barre integrates dynamic and static stretching throughout the workout. It helps open up hip flexors, hamstrings, calves, and the chest, improving range of motion. The increased mobility reduces the risk of strains and definitely improves your posture. It strengthens the muscles that support the spine, improves postures and alignment, which is crucial for both the aesthetics and joint health. It reduces lower back pain caused by weak glutes or tight hip flexors, which is very, very, very common in men. It improves neuromuscular coordination and body awareness. It helps with agility, balance, and effective movement patternings. It's incredible for athletes, for dancers, for skiers, and anyone who needs strong proprioception. It also helps you develop concentration and self-awareness similar to yoga or martial arts, and it encourages mental focus and presence during physical effort. It reduces the wear on knees, hips, and the spine. It builds strength evenly around joints, preventing muscular imbalance, and it improves circulation and connective tissue elasticity. So all in all, barre is an incredible, incredible workout, as well as a therapeutic exercise for both men and women. And again, on Fusion Body Studio, we are creating a playlist specifically for men, and my boyfriend has volunteered to be the model. I will be teaching these classes, and he is going to be modeling them for you. We are so excited about this, and we hope that this helps men get confidence to do these types of workouts. You can especially do them with your wives. Now, men can do the barre fusion classes that we already have on the platform, but in case you think those are a little too girly, you can do the barre for men, which are a little bit more masculine. And as Todd said recently, the beautiful thing too is that you can do this in the comfort of your own home, so your guy friends at the gym never have to know. You can do this by yourself, and it'll just be a mystery as to why all of a sudden you're getting your gym performance is enhancing. So with that being said, if you would like to experience barre for men and women, please join us over on Fusion Body Studio. I am going to give you Todd's discount code since he has volunteered to be our guinea pig. You can use discount code AYA20 at checkout for 20% off your first 6 months with us over on Fusion Body Studio. That's AYA20. That gives you 20% off. On top of that, you also get the first 7 days for free to try the studio out. And if you don't like it after 7 days, you can cancel, no problem. Otherwise, we so look forward to seeing you over on the studio. We really hope that this new playlist that were added to the studio helps all of our men and our women become more confident in their body and in their own healing and fitness journey. All right, you guys. So where were we in our gossip? So Catherine of Aragon is now married to Henry the Eighth. He becomes king, she becomes queen. Again, Henry the Eighth absolutely needs Catherine of Aragon because of who her mama and her daddy are. Like, do you know who I am? Like, Catherine of Aragon could literally be one of those people that's like, do you know who I am? Because her parents, Robbie, no, 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 no. Hold up. Robbie, lay down. Lay down. Sorry, guys. I've got a rambunctious dog. My boyfriend came home and he was giving me a kiss, and Robbie got very upset about it. So he is now making his emotions known. But nonetheless, here we are, Catherine of Aragon. Like, she's the person in Europe that can literally be like, excuse me, do you know who I am? She's like the most important person in the room. And Henry is now this young king. Now we think about Henry VIII, we think about the big fat guy at the end of his life. But we know at the beginning of his life, when he first took the throne, he was a stud. He was an athletic stud. He was constantly jousting. He was really into sports. Like, dude did not really have any any right, really. I mean, this is why monarchy is stupid. Like, he should have never been the king. Now, people do talk about like him becoming a psychopath. We all know the rhyme, the nursery rhyme of King Henry VIII, which goes divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. We all know that. But honestly, King Henry VIII, yeah, he was probably a tyrant and he was kind of psychotic, but he wasn't the worst of the monarchs. I think James the First was way worse than Henry VIII. Henry VIII was just like a selfish, spoiled child whose selfishness and spoiledness ruined lives because he had power, but he wasn't sadistic like James the First was. I mean, James the First literally wrote a book on how to boil and murder women. Like, he was crazy. His mother was Mary Queen of Scots. Don't even get me started on that bitch. Like, Mary Queen of Scots was, people have like glamorized her. She was a freaking brat and she deserved what she got. Like, she was, these are terrible people, just all in all. But in saying that, Henry VIII was a terrible person, but he wasn't the worst when comes to monarchy. I just want to make that very clear, okay? And Henry VIII is the product of this huge war of the roses, right? Like, his mama is Elizabeth of York, his grandmother is Elizabeth Woodville and Margaret Beaufort. You know, he's coming out of this. He is a product of this. His father was super paranoid about the Plantagenets coming in and removing him from the throne. Subsequently, so was Henry VIII. In the first part of his reign, we see a lot of executions of more Plantagenets, because he's just got to make sure that no one's going to challenge his throne. So anyway, the start of his reign, he's married to Catherine of Aragon. Um, there is these rumblings of Protestant Reformation are starting to happen on the continent. Um, at this point, though, England is very much connected to the Vatican. They're connected to Rome. They are a Protestant country. I mean, sorry, they are a Catholic country. They're going to be a Protestant country, but right now they are a Catholic country. Catherine of Aragon, being Spanish, is very Catholic. Her, we could get into Catherine of Aragon as well. Like, that girl probably had some PTSD. Her parents were responsible for the Spanish Inquisition. So this religious fervor that we're going to see in Catherine, that we're also going to see play out in her daughter Mary, who becomes Bloody Mary, there's a lot here going on when it comes to religion. And I think it's hard for us. I mean, I have spoken about how I'm concerned about that. It seems to be that that's happening again, especially with Christians in America. There's no hate quite like Christian love, right? Like, I feel like we could potentially go in that direction again. But as I was born in 1983 in my childhood, it really didn't matter. Like, people didn't care what religion you were. But back then, it mattered. And back then, if you weren't the right flavor of religion, you could be burned at the stake. You could be tortured, right? So this is not just some fickle matter. Like, this is a huge thing. But nonetheless, for the first part of Henry's reign, he was married to Catherine the longest, like over 20 years. And they were said to have a pretty good marriage. She was a good bit older than him, but they were friends. They were friendly. She was trained to be a leader herself, so she was able to go. Like I said, there's a story of her being with the military up fighting Scotland. She put the armor on. Her mother was a warrior, so these were equals in a lot of ways. And I do think that Henry respected Catherine in like her education, and they had a son. He died after 2 months. She had a bunch of miscarriages, and then they had Mary, who was their only surviving daughter. Now, at this point, again, this is going to stress Henry VIII out. Not only is he carrying over the paranoia of his father, because he is a Tudor, even though he is of royal blood through his mother, for sure, Elizabeth of York, but there's still a lot of people, cousins, distant cousins, remnants of the War of the Roses, who would be more than happy to take him off the throne. So he's getting more and more paranoid, and he does not have a son with Catherine. He needs a son, right? He's had sons with his mistresses, which were very common back then. We're going to get to that with Anne, very different than the way we think of it now. Um, so he knows that he can have sons, but he hasn't with Catherine. Catherine is getting closer to the age of 40, so the likelihood of her carrying a pregnancy is getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. So he's starting to get super paranoid about his only surviving child that is legitimate being Mary. We do see signs, historians will tell you that he does start to give Mary a lot of responsibilities. He moves her to Ludlow Castle, where subsequently she does kind of take on the Princess of Wales position. So we do know that Henry is potentially considering this could be a time when a woman inherits. I mean, his wife, her mother, his mother-in-law, Isabella of Castile, inherited her crown. So it's not that foreign, but still, I think Henry obviously would be way more comfortable with there being a son, right? So, anyway, at this point, we enter Anne Boleyn. Now, a lot of Anne's earlier life we don't really know much about. She was kind of like upper middle class. She had been spent a lot of her childhood at the French court, so she was quite educated in French etiquette, and she was very charismatic. She also was quite interested in some of these more Protestant beliefs that were flourishing on the continent. Now, at this point, when Anne enters the picture, there are a lot of books that have been banned, Protestant books that have been banned in England that Anne has. Now, this is super interesting. All right, so Anne's back at court. She becomes a lady in waiting to Catherine of Aragon, which is a very prestigious position for girls to have. They're basically they're basically working for, like personal assistants to the queen. And so for many girls to become a lady in waiting, they are matron and a maid in waiting. They can potentially find some advantageous matches for marriage. And that's kind of where we meet Anne at this point. We're not quite sure when she was born, either 1501 to 1507. There's a lot of discrepancy over when she was actually born, but nonetheless, she comes back to the English court. Her sister Mary Boleyn, who was we believe was the oldest of all the three surviving Boleyn children, she had already been a mistress to King Henry VIII. Now, again, it is common back then for there to be mistresses. It's not like it is now. Okay, after the Victorian age, we became way more prudish, and I believe in monogamy. Like I've said that before. I'm not if my cheating is a deal breaker for me. Like that is a boundary. I will never tolerate that. Right? That's a hard boundary. So, Ravi, but this is a different time. Okay, so it is common, it was expected for the king to have mistresses because most of the marriages are arranged marriages for political purposes. So queens kind of know that going into the relationship that this is going to happen. I don't think it bothers a lot of queens because let's remember for most of these queens, they don't love their husbands. You know, if you're with a guy, if you're basically in a business arrangement with a guy, you don't really give a shit like what that guy is doing in his spare time. Now, women could not have lovers as queens, and this becomes down to treason. Why is this treason? Well, it makes perfect sense to me. I know a lot of people are like, this isn't fair. And no, it's not fair, but it makes sense. All right. That's the nuance of it all, right? They didn't have DNA testing back then, y'all. So when we're looking at a royal bloodline, we know that the bloodline is very important for them. O negatives, that's me, very important to the royal family. They all want to be O negative. And so the only way back then that they could ensure that a child was of the bloodline was to make sure that the father of the child was the king. So that's why it was considered treason for a queen to have a lover. They needed to know for sure that the children she births are the king's children. This comes down to the security and safety of the nation, okay? As they saw it back then. Again, personally, I think monarchy is stupid. But back then, those were the rules of the game. So, Catherine, any woman going into this knows that she's not going to have a lover. Maybe there were some exceptions towards the end of life when the queen had already given the king multiple sons and children. She could maybe then have a lover because what did it matter at that point? But at this point, no, she has to be totally monogamous with the king, but the king does have multiple mistresses. And there was something called courtly love, and this didn't just happen for the royalty. This also happened within the noble families as well. So nobility oftentimes were arranged marriages. We know Anne, there was some arrangements going on with for Anne's marriage when she joins the court, and she's looking for an advantageous marriage, right? She's looking for that. So Henry notices Anne. He notices her and he thinks that she's hot. She's very charismatic, she's very smart, she's young. She's young. She's younger than him, way younger than Catherine. She's vivacious. And so he starts to send her letters of courtly love. This is what they did. I mean, they would just send these like sappy little love letters to these women in court, right? And this kind of frazzles Anne. Now, I don't really know what to make of this because being the mistress to a king, again, Anne is not, she's not a royal. She's not gonna, at this point, there's no way in hell she's ever gonna be a queen, right? She's just lucky to be in the gentry class, right? Like she's just lucky to be upper middle class. And so for her success as a woman, again, it's going to come down to who she can marry within her own class or maybe a step above. That's why she's at court. That's why she goes to be basically a personal assistant to the queen, is to meet these men so that her father, Thomas Boleyn, can create a match for his daughters. But to be the king's mistress, this is something, again, very, very different in this time. For most of the mistresses of the king, they are put in great favor. So even mistresses who are already married themselves to nobility or to an arranged marriage, if they are a mistress to the king, they can get perks for their family. Even illegitimate children born to these mistresses are spoiled by the royals. They're still considered to be like special kids. Okay? They can't be the ruling, they can't be, they can't inherit the throne, but they're treated as nobility, right? So this is not the same. We talk about Henry VIII wanting Anne to be his official mistress. This is not a slap across Anne's face. This could literally give the Boleyns the upper hand in society. It could promote her brother George. It could promote her father. It could level them up. So I don't know why Anne said no. Again, at this point, Henry VIII was not the fat guy we see in pictures. He was a stud himself, so he was quite good looking. So I don't really understand why Anne said no. Part of me, I mean, this is the same thing kind of Elizabeth Woodville did, Henry's grandmother did with Henry's grandfather, right? His mother's mother. She kind of did the same thing as we spoke about earlier on the road, where she was like, I'd rather die than, be a piece of meat for you. But again, we're moving into a different time period, kind of post-Renaissance. Like I ponder this a lot with Anne. Was Anne refusing to be Henry's mistress because she was smart, like Elizabeth Woodville, and she wanted more power? Did she know the power of her lady parts? And she knew if she played hard to get, it would be more advantageous for her? Or was she like a prude? Because I have a hard time with this because even though Anne herself was devoutly religious, just like Catherine of Aragon, maybe she had more Protestant views though. Um, This is not, we cannot, like I said in the beginning, we cannot look at this from the lens of our modern times because this was normal. This was normal practice to be asked to be the official mistress to the king. And normally a woman would be excited about this opportunity. A family would be excited about this opportunity because this could lead to more power for the family. So I don't think she was saying no because she was a prude, because that was just not how things were back then. They weren't like they are now. But I also don't think that Anne ever considered that her being queen would be a possibility in the beginning. So I don't know why she did this. I don't know if she had another plan up her sleeve because looking at the way culture was back then, she could have been his mistress, but also been arranged into a great marriage, maybe even a better marriage because she had been his mistress. She wasn't going to be his mistress forever. Mistresses, I mean, Madame de Montespan in France for Louis XIV was probably one of the longest running mistresses, but most mistresses, they kind of were there for a while and then they would leave and they would be done, and but their family was still looked at with favor. And so I don't know why she did this. I wish we had more of the records or more of an understanding of why Anne would have done this. But Anne was very smart. Anne was just like Elizabeth Woodville and Margaret Beaufort. She was smart. She knew for the most part how to play chess with these men. She knew these men were dumb, like Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville, and she knew her own power. They say Anne Boleyn wasn't the most beautiful woman at court, but there was something about her. There was something about her that was intriguing. As I've heard a historian say, Anne wasn't nice. She wasn't like a nice girl. She could be kind of petty and bitchy, and she was strong and fierce, and she had a way about her that she could dominate in a man's world if she wanted to. And they say she learned a lot of this from serving in the French court of how to do this. But nonetheless, Henry is like, becomes more obsessed with Anne because she won't sleep with him. She won't sleep with him. I'm telling you, girls who are in your 20s, there's power here. There's power here. Make a man earn it. Hopefully you won't end up like Anne Boleyn, but as we get there. But Henry becomes obsessed with her. He becomes obsessed with her. And she basically says that, just like Elizabeth Woodville says, I'm not going to be your mistress. If you want me to sleep with you, I'm going to have to do it as your wife. Just like, exactly like Henry's grandmother with his grandfather. Same thing. So he is trying to figure out how, just like his grandfather, he was so horny and so hot. His grandfather was so horny and so hot for Elizabeth Woodville that he basically married her just to be able to boink her. Same thing was happening with Henry. He was so horny for Anne and so obsessed with her that he had to figure out a way to marry her, to make her his wife so that he could boink her. We got a problem. That's Catherine of Aragon. Now, there were annulments, there were divorces, but they were few and far between, and they had to be under special circumstances. So Henry VIII is racking his brain trying to figure out a way to divorce Catherine of Aragon. Now, we're going to see later that when Henry wants to get rid of a wife, just like Anne and later with Catherine Howard, he just executes them. He's not going to do this with Catherine of Aragon, though. And this adds a very interesting conversation between regicide and homicide. Catherine of Aragon was a regal born woman. She was monarchy. So I think that's kind of what saved her life. Even though the last part of her life was not nice, like she didn't have a great part of the back part of her life with Catherine, I think because she was royal blood, Henry would have never considered assassinating her. So he's got to divorce her, but he cannot figure out what to do to get this divorce. Meanwhile, he's super stressed about boys, and he goes back to the Bible. And there's this verse in Leviticus that speaks about if you take your brother's wife, you will be cursed by not having children. Well, silly, because he had children. He had Mary, and he had a son that lived for like 2 months. But for Henry, he believed that having children meant sons. Mary doesn't count. She doesn't count. And so he takes that before the Pope, basically, the kingiest of kings. And he's like, listen, I know Catherine said she didn't there was no boinking between her and Arthur, so legally that gave us right to get married, but I haven't had any children. And look at this verse in Leviticus. I think maybe they did boink. And so I have now been betrayed by God. God has not shown favor upon me by giving me a son because I've taken my brother's wife. And the Pope kind of sits on this for a minute, but here's the thing. The Pope is in alliance with Catherine's nephew, who is the Holy Roman Empire in Spain. So the Pope's on Catherine's side because of the Spanish Empire. And so the Pope is like, Peter says, no, no, we're not doing this, girl. You are married to Catherine. I need you to stay married to Catherine, okay? I need you to stay married to her because my bestie over here, who's the Holy Roman Empire in Spain, like, he's my bestie. So listen, bro, you're just gonna have to stay married to Catherine. You're gonna have to deal with it. I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, keep trying for a son. And so Henry is getting so frustrated. He does not know what to do. He's being cock blocked basically by the Pope and the Pope's bestie. He can't get rid of Catherine. He can't get rid of her. So then Anne, being quite clever, these books that she has that are actually banned in England, but she has them from the continent. These were books about the Protestant faith, about how maybe because Henry VIII is the divine ruler of the United Kingdom, like who does he have to answer to? Like he doesn't have to answer to the Pope. That's crazy. That's wackadoo. Like why, Henry, would you have to answer to the Pope? You are appointed by God to be the ruler of this nation. You are God's chosen ruler. I mean, look, your brother, I'm sorry, but he obviously wasn't God's chosen ruler because he died young. The crown wasn't supposed to be sitting on your head, but here it is. You were God's chosen. And this Pope, with this Protestant faith, we're starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, and this I agree with, the Pope should have never existed to begin with. Like, look here in Scripture. Jesus says nothing about a Pope. But we know that you guys rule by the divine right. So, Henry, maybe you then, according to Scripture, should be the head of your own church. You should be the Pope of your own church. You need to break with Rome. And then guess what, babe? Guess what that means? You can just grant your own divorce. So Henry starts to go, you know what? Anne, I think you're right. Maybe there is something to this crazy Protestant Reformation. Maybe I'm being silly by thinking that I should bow to the Pope. Like, who the fuck's the Pope? I'm Henry VIII. I'm divine right, not the Pope. I rule England, not the Pope. So this starts Henry's break from Rome, which starts the Church of England. Now, I talk a lot about the Church of England in my deep dive into King James the First and the King James Bible. I will tag that down below. We're not going to get super into like the Pandora's box that opens, that shit show opens. But nonetheless, Henry has now broken from Rome. Now, here's the thing though, even though Henry is taking a Protestant path by making himself the head of the Church of England, he's not really a Protestant. Okay, he's really not. Like he is really like Catholic. He's Catholic light at this point. He's like diet Catholic at this point. And that's why the Church of England or the Episcopalian Church here in the United States is like basically Catholicism without the Pope. Is because that was the whole point, was that Henry wanted to grant his own divorce, which would give him the right to marry Anne. And that, my friends, is what he did in a nutshell. A little bit more complicated than that, but he marries Anne. Finally, he can boink her all he wants. He's made her the queen, and she gets pregnant pretty quickly. And they are certain that this is going to be a boy. They're certain, because she promised him that she would give him a boy. She promised him that would happen. She would birth a boy for him. So they're preparing for the new prince. But as it turns out, it's a princess. It's Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who is named after Henry's mother, Elizabeth of York, his grandmother, Elizabeth Woodville, and Anne's mother was named Elizabeth. So we have baby Elizabeth. At this point, Mary, his daughter from Catherine, has been stripped of her royal title. She is now deemed illegitimate. Mary's a totally different story. She is a fascinating person in history. Bloody Mary. There's a reason why I think she got sadistic when she took the throne, because that girl was used and abused so much. But nonetheless, this isn't an episode about Mary. We can do an episode about Mary if y'all want to. But Anne is now, and they say when Elizabeth was born that Henry was disappointed, but Anne had not fallen from grace yet. Okay. She had not fallen from grace yet, because Henry was like, okay, well, we have a daughter. We have a healthy daughter. That means we can have sons. And so Henry and Anne get pregnant again, but she miscarries. Like, all these things are happening. She doesn't reign for that long. I think she's only on the throne for like 3 years. Historians correct me in the comment, fact check me if you want to on that. Before Henry starts to realize that he believes, and this is what's crazy about men sometimes, and like narcissists, and like not once is he going to take accountability for his wiener getting him in trouble. It must be Anne. She must be a witch. She must be doing crazy things, because I can't be wrong. I can't be wrong. And so basically, there were some trumped up charges where he accused Anne of treason, because he accused her of having like all these other lovers. I mean, Thomas Cromwell was kind of behind all this. That gets into a totally different story. One of them being her brother George, which gross. We know we're pretty certain that these charges were fake. That she had all these lovers. He didn't even know if Elizabeth was his child, which LOL, she looked just like him. So there is no denying who her daddy is. Like, he was her father. And she's basically, there's like a kangaroo court, they find her guilty. And shockingly, I think she thinks that she's going to be just divorced, just like Catherine was, which is embarrassing for women in those days. But no, they actually give her death. There's a death warrant, which is wild, because even though she's not, as I said with Catherine of Aragon, I don't think that Henry assassinated her because he knew for sure that this woman was more royal than he was. And also, if he killed her, like, he's gonna have Spain invade, and that can't happen. So, but Anne's not, she is a queen consort. Like, she's not, she was made queen by him. She's peasant blood. She's commoner. So he is setting a precedent here, though, that you can actually execute a royal. This is a dangerous precedent. I mean, I personally, again, do not believe in royalty, don't think that that's stupid, but this is opening up the door for more royal people in the future to come to be executed. Catherine Howard eventually meets the demise of Henry VIII by the axe. She is actually Anne's cousin too, so that's interesting. Then we have like Charles I, who gets with the English Civil War, which I've talked about that with Oliver Cromwell. I'll tag those videos below too. We also have the French Revolution is coming in a few hundred years. It's going to come, and we're going to see the decapitation, the guillotine of Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette, which they were super royal, and they met the axe. So this is opening up this regicide. This is opening up a door that's going to change things. We've also opened up a door too with Anne because of the Protestant Reformation. Now, again, Henry wasn't really a Protestant. He was more of a diet Catholic, a Catholic light. He just wanted to be able to boink who he wanted to boink. He didn't want any, think about that, like people who've never been told no before. Like they're horrible people to work with. If you've ever known someone or been with someone who's never been told no before, like it's a nightmare, right? So this is Henry. Henry's never been told no before. And so now he can now really do what he wants. He can execute who he wants because now he is the controller of his own church, which becomes in America the Episcopalian Church. But we've also opened the door to Protestant Reformation. Even though Henry himself is not really a Protestant, we've opened up this door. The door is open. Pandora's box has been opened. Now, Henry himself did also execute people for being too Protestant. Anne Askew was one of them. She was terrible story about her. Shame. So people who are a little too Protestant, a little too radical, we just want to be a little bit less Catholic, basically. But we then got his son, that comes in with Jane Seymour, the next wife who delivers a son, and he is super Protestant. So Anne is responsible for this. Like Anne is the reason why that this happened, right? If Catherine of Aragon had had a son, a surviving son, I don't know what the history of the Western world would look like at this point. That's hard to think about. England now is notoriously a Protestant country. The Church of England still exists today. The monarchy is still ahead of the Church of England just because of Henry VIII. So King Charles is now the head of the Church of England. That was because of Henry VIII, because of Anne Boleyn. Yeah? Anne Boleyn. I mean, the Protestant Reformation, as we've talked about before, is what inspired capitalism. I myself am not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person. Don't really like religion. You know that if you've been on this channel for a while, I'm very suspicious of religion. I think it's a control mechanism. But I will say I do believe that the product two things can be true, right? I can hate religion, but also acknowledge that the Protestant Reformation was probably one of the most important things that happened in Western Europe. Really, truly. And we're looking at coming from a dark age where people did not know how to read or write, especially in Latin, to an age where more people started to grant access to education, to read the Bible and to read these scriptures and to realize how much they had been lied to by the Catholic Church. I can't stand Catholicism. I think the Catholic Church is many things. The least among them is it's a crime syndicate, right? Nothing about the Catholic faith is biblical. Nothing about it. And I don't even like the Bible. I think the Bible is totally propaganda and it's been made up. I don't think it's the word of God. But if we're looking at the Bible, nothing about the Catholic faith is actually biblical at all. At all. So I'm batting for the Protestants for this one, even though I don't even like the Protestant churches. But this was important. So whether you are Catholic, whether you are whatever, if you live in the Western world, the Protestant Reformation is what shaped the Western world as we know it today. It's what shaped the foundation of the United States of America. Because the United States of America went a little further. And they said, you know what? We don't believe in monarchy, and we also are going to give people the right to believe what they want to believe because look what happened in Europe with all the burnings and everything. We're just not going to play that game. This all started with Anne Boleyn. She was the nucleus. She was the domino, the first domino to fall that created the society that we know today. With Protestantism, again, I've said this before, it is what inspired the capitalist government. Capitalism, for all its faults, it's not perfect, nothing's perfect, is the polar opposite of communism. Having a monarchy, a tyrannical king is like communism, socialism, right? But having no king, that's the closest thing we know, Pope. That's capitalism, where you have the freedom to be whoever you want to be. You just have to work for it. Entrepreneurship, right? That's what capitalism means. It's total freedom, it's total liberty, it's total responsibility within yourself to take care of yourself. That is what came in with the Protestant Reformation. Because with the Protestant Reformation, we're pulling away from this idea of a pope giving sanctions for your soul. And that's going to slowly start to chisel away with the idea of a monarchy as well. So Anne Boleyn is one of the most important figures historically for us in the Western world. She is the reason why the Western world is the way it is. I don't think she even knew that. I don't think she had a clue. She birthed a daughter who became one of the greatest rulers that England ever had. Even though I don't believe in monarchy, I can acknowledge that Elizabeth was a great ruler. She was pragmatic. She didn't come into her reign being very emotional like her dad. She was able to be pragmatic. That's what made her a good ruler. That's what brought England into this golden age, right? Of exploration, of explorers, of people being able to go to this new world. Yeah? So Anne is one of the most important people. She's so important. So that leads us to the flowers that are left on her grave every single year on May 19th. the anniversary of her execution. So let's look at this, guys. Let me type this in quickly. Okay, we are going to use something that I don't really like to use, but we're going to use it anyway. We're going to use AI. A bouquet of red roses is placed on Anne Boleyn's grave every year on the anniversary of her death by the Boleyn family. So they figured out who did it. Bullen, who are believed to be descendants of the Boleyn family. The mystery of the anonymous donor was solved after years of research, and the family now has permission to place the flowers in the chapel. A bouquet of red roses is laid on her memorial slab every year on the 19th of May, the anniversary of her execution in 1536. The flowers are from the Boleyn family, descendants of Boleyn's sister Mary. They initially sent them anonymously through a firm of trustees. The bouquet is accompanied by a card that reads, Queen Anne Boleyn, 1536. The public cannot access their own flowers on the grave, but they can see the roses when the chapel is open. I find that so incredibly endearing that they do this every year to honor Anne. Now, again, I understand it makes sense, right? It's descendants of Mary Boleyn, her sister, the one surviving child, because George was also executed, the brother, because he was accused of having incest with Anne, which we know wasn't true. And so Mary's descendants are the ones who now we know they're the ones who've been placing the roses on her grave. For a long time, nobody knew who it was. But it's kind of powerful, right? It's powerful because, again, Anne, this woman who had such a short life, changed the course of history simply because she said she wasn't going to be mistress to the king. The world we live in today, for better, for worse, partially is because of Anne. And to honor her every year by placing flowers on the place for which we believe her body is buried is quite, in my opinion, impactful. I thought it was kind of cool though before we knew who it was, like just for it to be a mystery, of who's doing it, but very, very, very impactful. So the mystery is solved. It is descendants of Mary. You know who else are descendants of Mary Boleyn? Queen Diana. Queen Diana, Princess Diana. Princess Diana was also a descendant of Mary Boleyn. So lots of people are descendants of the Boleyns. And anyway, you guys, I know that was a long one. Thank you for sitting through this gossip sesh with me. Let me know, what are your petty thoughts on Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville and all these stupid men? What are your petty thoughts on Catherine of Aragon? And what are your petty thoughts on Anne? Let me know your petty thoughts about the monarchy. Let me know down in the comment section below. All the videos I mentioned will be tagged in the description box. There's so many other stories I could shoot off for this one. I've covered some of them, like I've covered Catherine de Medici. I've covered King James the First and the King James Bible, who again was way more sadistic than King Henry VIII, in my opinion. I've covered Oliver Cromwell and the execution of the king, Charles I. So I will tag those all down below. Otherwise, leave me your thoughts, guys. Let's continue this conversation in the comments section. And I thank you guys so much for sitting through this, and we will talk very soon. Bye, everybody.